welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, certainly with the presidential election coming upon us, we've had quite a bit of controversy already. And recently, Barack Obama put out a regulation that gives him the power, I believe, with Obamacare to force Catholic institutions to provide contraception and abortifacients to virtually everybody in America. And to discuss this matter today, we have C.J. Doyle. He's the Executive Director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Welcome, C.J.
Glad to be here, Brendan.
C.J., can you give our viewers, what is this all about, this controversy, and where do you stand on the particular issue?
In 2010, Congress passed and President Obama signed into law the so-called healthcare reform bill, which would create eventually a kind of a nationalized healthcare system in the United States. This is a regulation which stems from that. That is to say, it was actually issued not by the White House, but by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under Kathleen Sebelius. By the way, there's an interesting backstory here. From one of the things we've learned now is that both former Chief of Staff Bill Daley and Vice President Joe Biden, neither of whom are pro-life, always pro-abortion, they were opposed to this because they realized the firestorm that it would create. And it was Kathleen Sebelius, who apparently, the friend of Dr. George Killer Tiller, and who, as governor of Kansas, was one of the biggest pro-abortion fanatics in the country, who improvidently talked President Obama into this. So this was a regulation issued, and it required all employer-sponsored group health insurance plans to provide coverage for contraception, including abortifacients, and coverage for sterilizations. And this is similar to a law that we already have here in Massachusetts, which we've had since 2002. Now, it included specific abortifacients, such as Eller and Plan B, but it's important to realize that all hormonal contraception is potentially abortifacient insofar as it can prevent implantation of the uterine wall after conception. So what you have are even the ordinary birth control pill can cause a chemical abortion of an embryonic human being. So this would require Catholics not only to do something which was contrary to their religion, contrary to divine and natural law, but would actually coerce them into subsidizing something which they correctly understand to be murder, to be the killing of the innocent. So this is, again, a grievous assault on the conscience rights of Catholics. Now, there was a religious exemption in the regulation, but it only applied to churches. That is to say, and only applied in cases of sectarian institutions who would predominantly serve members of their own denomination and predominantly employ members of their own denomination. So no Catholic hospital, no Catholic charity, no Catholic college or secondary school, no Catholic university, no Catholic fraternal order, but virtually no Catholic organization would meet this very narrow, so narrow as to be meaningless religious exemption, which meant basically all Catholic institutions would be forced to cooperate not only in something that's gravely immoral, but something that would involve the taking of innocent human life. Again, this is a terrible assault, a grievous assault on the consciences of Catholics. It's probably the worst attack on American religious freedom in 90 years since Oregon tried in the 1920s unsuccessfully to prohibit parochial schools. And it created a firestorm. And I think one of the things that blindsided the Obama administration and that Biden and Daley were correct about was that it not only got the American Catholic bishops for the first time in 40 years to talk about contraception, but even liberal Catholics like Mark Shields and E.J. Dionne and others came out and felt they were thrown under the bus. These people who supported Obama in 2008 and formed part of the president's political base, they themselves were now embarrassed and repudiated and felt this was an attack on religious liberty. So this created an enormous firestorm. Many people predicted that there would be a change in the policy, and a change came, but it's more of a cosmetic change than a substantive change. The proposal that came out last Friday from the administration was that instead of having Catholic institutions directly through their group employee health insurance plans pay for sterilizations and contraceptives and abortifacients, the insurance companies would provide it for free to any employee, and the Catholic institutions supposedly wouldn't have to refer. But again, this is more cosmetic than substantive, because what it means is instead of Catholic institutions providing this service in their group health insurance plans, they're just going to pay for group health insurance plans that provide the service. So one way or the other, the bottom line is Catholic institutions will pay for birth control. This is a capitalist society. The insurance companies will simply pass the additional cost on to their customers, which in this case are the very same institutions who had moral objections to it in the first place. So the bottom line is Catholic institutions will still pay for devices and chemicals and procedures which are abhorrent to the Catholic conscience. Plus there's also the issue of what about non-religious Catholic employers? What about Catholic insurance companies like the Christian Brothers or like the Foresters? What about Catholic individuals who are purchasing insurance? Again, they're being forced to cooperate in something that is not only immoral, but is the taking of innocent human life. So this is really this was a very, very serious mistake on the part of the administration. They haven't dug themselves out of it yet. I think the bishops have correctly indicated that this so-called compromise is not much of a compromise. Planned Parenthood is praising the so-called compromise, so you can tell right then and there. There's something.
And NARAL has
yeah.
put $250,000 into praising Obama for putting forth this.
Clearly, the solution is inadequate. The mandate has to be withdrawn. Otherwise, religious freedom rights are being assaulted. You know, Brendan,
how does religious freedom rights affect others that are not Catholic?
Well, a lot of people are being. Evangelicals have come out and said that this is an attack on their religious belief. Even if they don't agree with Catholics on birth control, they agree with Catholics on abortion, and these are abortifacients like Eller and Plan B. The Lutherans now have come out opposed to this. Missouri Synod, which is the largest Lutheran group. The Baptists are the largest single Protestant denomination in the United States, and the Baptists have come out against this. Plus 65 Greek and Russian and Eastern Orthodox bishops have come out against this. Now, you know, the Eastern Orthodox have always been very kind of low-key in terms of their political approach to politics and public controversies. So this is really kind of a breakthrough that Eastern Orthodox leaders are coming out and denouncing this. So you're seeing Catholics coming out against this, Eastern Orthodox, Baptists, Lutherans, evangelicals. It's a broad and widening religious coalition, and as I said, it's a very, very serious assault on the religious freedom rights of Catholics, on the conscience rights of Catholics. Liberals are developing a very totalitarian attitude towards the First Amendment and towards the Free Exercise Clause. You know, in the Soviet Union, you had freedom of worship sometimes, and that was limited to freedom, the freedom to engage in liturgical services, to engage in worship on Sunday morning. The American conception has always been very different. In the American jurisprudential tradition, the American constitutional tradition, has always been that freedom of the free exercise of religion doesn't just involve the freedom to worship on Sunday mornings. It involves the freedom to act in accordance with your religiously formed conscience and not have to have that conscience violated unless there was a compelling state interest, which is a very high legal and constitutional bar. And you know, whenever freedom of religion is attacked, it never begins with a battering ram on the front door of the church on Sunday morning. It begins with attempts to marginalize and constrict and constrain the charitable and the educational and the medical and the social service and the cultural aspects of a religious group. And this is what's going on here. If this goes through, basically it will drive the Catholic Church out of healthcare. It will drive the Catholic Church out of many provisions of social services. It'll increase the secularization of Catholic colleges and universities and schools. It's putting the Catholic Church in an impossible position where you either have to collaborate in the violation of your conscience, or you have to refuse to give health care to your employees. And of course, under the Health Reform Act of 2010, you can now be fined for refusing for an employer to refuse to provide health care, which means somebody, I think, accurately pointed out we're back to the 16th century in the recusancy laws, where Catholics suffered these suffocating fines in Elizabethan England because they wouldn't conform to the Queen's religion by law established, the Church of England. So this is a morally impossible position for Catholics and for other pro-lifers. And I think it's going to be an ongoing battle. And I think the president made a mistake here because, you know, if he wanted to talk about the economy for the election, and now this social issues have rearisen, and it's going to be framed as a religious liberty issue. And this could be very, very, this could be a dominant factor in the forthcoming presidential election. It could be a very, very important factor in the legislative election, the congressional elections, because one of the things the bishops, I think, and others will be doing, they'll not only be seeking legal relief through litigation, but they'll also be seeking legislative relief through the Congress.
Now, do you see the whole issue, for instance, there was a debate several weeks ago where George Stephanopoulos, a Democratic operative who works for ABC, kept hammering away at Mitt Romney on contraception. Do you think that this is a strategy that the Democrats have lost the abortion issue, so now they're moving over to the contraception issue?
Well, Romney is in no position to criticize President Obama on contraception. You know, Romney, as the governor here in Massachusetts from 2003 to 2007, he was the one who essentially pulled the rug out from under Catholic hospitals on the emergency contraception issue. In 2005, the legislature passed a bill requiring all hospitals in Massachusetts to provide a so-called emergency contraception, the morning after pill and Plan B, to rape victims. And there was a general consensus, a general understanding that a pre-existing statute dating back to 1975 and the administration of Governor Michael Dukakis would exempt Catholic hospitals from this. And this understanding was broad enough that it included not only former Governor Dukakis and included the Massachusetts Catholic Conference, but even the Boston Globe admitted this in one of their editorials.
Recently?
At the time, in 2005, the Boston Globe admitted in their editorial at the time that the pre-existing religious exemption statute would in fact exempt Catholic hospitals. And an attempt to put in language by the state Senate to invalidate that previous exemption was taken out in conference committee by then Majority Leader Rogers in the House. So the legislation passed without any kind of without any kind of provision invalidating the previous exemption. So everyone understood, as I said, most people understood, I shouldn't say everybody, most people on both sides of the issue understood that Catholic hospitals would not be affected by this, including, by the way, Governor Romney's own Public Health Commissioner, Paul Cote, who said that, yes, indeed, the new law, when it goes into effect, will not apply to Catholic hospitals. 4 days later, Governor Romney, through the office of his legal counsel, comes out and says, oh, no, the old exemption does not apply, and the new legislation does, in fact, force Catholic hospitals. So this was an entirely novel, unheard of, unprecedented interpretation of this law, an entirely unwarranted interpretation, which no one else shared. Catholic Conference was opposed to it. Our organization, the Catholic Actually, was opposed to it. As I said, even Governor Dukakis had indicated that the previous exemption applied. And here we have a situation where it was essentially Governor Romney, not the church's ideological enemies on the left, not the advocates of abortion and contraception, not a liberal court, but it was Governor Romney who essentially committed the injury to the religious freedom rights and the conscience rights of Catholic hospitals. And then when he did so, he also said that in his heart he believed that women should receive emergency contraception. So now we have Governor Romney complaining about President Obama's plan for contraceptive coverage. But he's really not in a very good position to assert that, given his own mixed record on that. And by the way, as you know, we had a pre-existing law on contraceptive coverage in Massachusetts going back to 2002, and a pre-existing Supreme Court decision, Moe versus Hanley, going back to 1981, on abortion coverage. But John McDonough, who was the left-wing Democrat who ran Health Care for All and was the chairman of the Health Care Committee of the Massachusetts House, and who served in the Massachusetts legislature from 1985 to 1997, John McDonough recently said that because of Mitt Romney's Commonwealth Care in 2006, 88,000 people got access to reproductive and family planning services, which of course means abortions, abortifacients, contraception, and sterilization. So here we have Governor Romney again criticizing the White House and criticizing the president, but you know, his own record is one that was supportive of contraception, including abortifacients. So this is you know, a very, very, I think, interesting exercise in political hypocrisy. You know, Governor Romney is, people say he's a flip-flopper. I think that's a great injustice. I think he's been a very consistent politician. I think he's consistently worked both sides of the street on the same issue at the same time, and I think he's been consistently cynical and expedient and self-serving in his approach to these things. This is very, very another case where we see Republican rhetoric, but we don't necessarily see Republican governance that conforms to that rhetoric. So social conservatives and pro-lifers, I think, have to be very, very careful whenever they're dealing with any Republican candidate on these issues.
Yeah. Well, I know other Republican candidates have been very forthright where they stand. And more so than I would say on the other side of the aisle.
Oh, sure.
Now, let me ask you though, why did Cote say one thing and 4 days later, was it in the legislation? Couldn't they both read the legislation?
Well, as I said,
Romney's overruling Cote?
Yeah, I mean, Romney's, through his legal counsel, is overruling his own public health commissioner. As I said, most people understood the pre-existing exemption applied. And an attempt to force it, to invalidate that, to eliminate that exemption through legislative language was taken out of the bill, in conference. So it was very clear that the new law on emergency contraception did not invalidate the old religious exemption, and it was the governor's office himself, not his own public health commissioner, that came out with this entirely novel, unheard of, perplexing, astonishing, surprising interpretation. Now Romney did veto the bill. The veto was overridden, by the way, enormously, and he did propose a new religious exemption, but that was an inherently unworkable solution given the composition of the legislature. We only got 16 votes out of 160 in the House to sustain Governor Romney's veto, which meant there were no votes for a new religious exemption law. So Governor Romney proposed this new religious exemption, and then, of course, when it didn't pass, he lamented the attack on conscience rights and was able to portray himself when he ran around the country, running for president, campaigned around the country, as somebody who was a friend of religious freedom and a friend of traditional morality. While at the same time, his lieutenant governor, Kerry Murphy Healy, was able to run for election as governor in 2006 without taking any grief from liberals or feminists on the emergency contraception issue. So I think this was a case where the Republicans really kind of had their cake and ate it too on this issue.
I see. And now, looking at the situation here in Massachusetts, you disagree with the president of Massachusetts Citizens for Life regarding Romney. Where does she stand on Romney, or why is she pushing Romney?
Well, I don't know much about what she said, except that she was quoted in National Review praising Romney on the emergency contraception law, which I think is a very difficult thing to do for someone who's a pro-life perspective, and claiming that he vetoed it and this was a substantial thing when, as I said, it wasn't. We all knew the votes were not there to easily override the veto, and the votes were there to easily override the veto. She also indicates that he was compelled by his counsel to do this. Now, when I worked for the legislature years ago, the counsels worked for the Speaker and they worked for the Senate President, they worked for the Governor, not vice versa. The counsel doesn't tell the Governor what to do, he doesn't tell the Speaker of the House what to do, he doesn't tell the President of the Senate what to do. And if a political figure wants a particular interpretation of law, his counsel will no doubt provide that. So, this is really a case of claiming that the legal counsel, and the legal counsel's opinion was not the opinion shared by almost everyone else on the issue. So it was a very exceptional, as I said, novel and unheard of and unprecedented opinion. So again, I think that Governor Romney was very disingenuous, I think very cynical about this. And I think we've seen that a great deal in terms of how he treated these issues as governor.
Now, where do you see the Democrats with this election cycle coming up, and it's still a ways till the presidential election, dealing with the Democrats are saying, well, we lost the abortion issue, really, but the contraception issue is ours, and it's a perplexing one for the
Well, it's very sad because, the Democratic Party traditionally was the party of Catholics in this country, and it traditionally was the party of those who were underprivileged. And there's no group of people more underprivileged than unborn children. And it's very, very sad to see the Democratic Party completely taken over by these pro-abortion fanatics and pro-contraception fanatics, and by this extreme social liberalism. It was the Republican Party years ago that was the party of Margaret Sanger and birth control. And one of the reasons that
Nelson Rockefeller.
And Nelson Rockefeller, and of course George Bush's grandfather, Senator Prescott Bush of Connecticut, was the treasurer of Planned Parenthood in Connecticut. Do you know how the Democrats took over state government in Massachusetts, Brendan?
No,
there was a referendum in 1948 that the Republicans pushed to legalize birth control. And it brought out a tremendous Catholic vote in Massachusetts, and because of that, the Democrats took over the state legislature in Massachusetts and took over most of the constitutional offices. So it was actually it was Catholic Democrats who were opposed to birth control and abortion, and it was Yankee Republicans who were in favor of it. And now, of course, both parties have switched, and the Democratic Party has become just absolutely fanatical now on abortion and contraception. And I think you're right. They sense that they're losing the argument on abortion. More and more young people, particularly, are upset over the loss of they see the absence of their brothers and sisters. Something like 1 in 3 American pregnancies now end in abortion. But they're going to try to frame it as a birth control issue and as a contraception issue. This is also...
How about a woman's right issue?
Yes, it is.
That's how else they're going to frame it.
They're also going to try to frame it, but this is also not only a contraception issue, but it's also a religious freedom issue. It's also a constitutional issue. And both the the free exercise clause of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and the constitutions of all 50 states guarantee freedom of religion. And by the way, this is the very first lines of the First Amendment, before they get to freedom of the press or right to petition the government for the redress of grievances or freedom of assembly, refer to freedom of religion. So this is one of the foundational liberties of the American constitutional system. And it's really being traduced here by these efforts to force religious employers to provide services and devices and pharmaceuticals that not just violate, but really rape their consciences. And it has to be resisted, and it has to be made clear that if the government proceeds with this, that the only alternative will be with like what Dr. Martin Luther King did, which will be civil disobedience. And it will not only, it'll be litigation, it'll be legislation, it'll be politics, it'll be political mobilization, it'll be everything. But this is, I'd also say one thing is, you know, the bishops are doing the right thing, and I don't want to go out of my way to criticize them. But one of the reasons we're in this mess is because the bishops have been silent on this issue for 40 years, and they've evaded it, and they haven't talked about it, and they haven't tried to catechize anyone on it. They've tolerated dissent on it. Most parochial school students and CCD students and Catholic university students have never read Humanae Vitae, much less Casti Connubii and others. We have people making astonishing claims that numbskull Marjorie Egan was on Greater Boston the other night, saying that the Catholic Church has only been opposed to birth control since 1968, which is a level of her stupidity, but it's also an ignorance that perhaps is more widespread, given, again, the lack of any catechesis on this. I've lived in Boston, in the Archdiocese of Boston, all my life. I've never heard a sermon on birth control in my lifetime. So that there's been a tremendous cowardice here on the part of the clergy. There's corruption in the religious orders and the parent religious orders of our educational institutions. BC and Stonehill and Holy Cross and Emmanuel are filled with people who dissent on this issue. So the bishops are going to have a hard road because they've allowed so much treason and treachery and dissent within their own institutions. So I commend them for standing up on this, but it would have been, they'd be better prepared if they had developed a lay Catholic intelligentsia over the years that would be willing to articulate this and defend this. There should be Catholic university professors and Catholic attorneys and Catholic writers and Catholic media individuals and Catholic public officials that should be able to get up and carry on this issue. But the bishops and the clergy, through their negligence, have not formed them. And the religious orders, through their negligence, have not formed them over the last 40 years. So, I mean, kudos to the bishops for what they're doing. But one of the reasons we're in this mess in the first place is because of their negligence over the last 4 decades.
Let me ask, we've only got a couple minutes left. What litigation-wise, I read recently that 12 attorney generals are going to be litigating against this Obama regulation. Can they do that?
Well, I'm not sure about that particular response, but clearly, I mean, if this is a First Amendment religious freedom issue, which it is, this will go into the federal courts and it will eventually go to the United States Supreme Court. So I think we're going to see a very long, protracted, knockdown, drag-out legal fight on this if there is not a further modification of this so-called mandate, this actual mandate. So this is a very, very serious matter. Again, this is the worst assault in our lifetime, probably, on Catholic religious freedom rights. Again, it's probably the worst assault. Oregon tried to ban parochial schools in the 1920s, went to the Supreme Court, it produced a Supreme Court decision upholding the right of parents to send their children to religious schools. And I think this is really the worst assault on Catholic religious freedom since that time. And again, you're forcing Catholics to cooperate in something that is not only condemned by the Church, is not only, as I said, a violation of divine and natural law, but participates in the killing of the innocent, in the killing of embryonic human beings through chemical abortions. And this is just an horrific imposition on the consciences of Catholics. Well, this other left-winger, Joan Vanocchi in the Globe, said Catholics are trying to impose their religious views on non-Catholic employees. Well, you know, asking someone to participate in murder, I think, is a very, very serious imposition of conscience, which liberals are completely indifferent to. It also tells you how completely disrespectful liberals are, not only of the Church, but of the First Amendment and of the traditional the traditional American understanding of religious liberty. Again, this is a very, very totalitarian understanding of religious freedom. It's an attempt to really narrow and constrict religious freedom to the right to worship. And it's much more important than the right to worship. It's also the right, again, to act in accordance with your religiously formed conscience and not to have to violate that conscience as a condition of being a citizen, of being a taxpayer, of providing social services. And you think that, the Church church is the largest provider of health care in the United States outside of the U.S. government. It is the largest provider of social services outside of the government. And this is really a terrible attempt to force the church effectively out of these things. And by the way, if they get away with this, Brendan, the next step will be forcing Catholic hospitals and Catholic institutions to perform and Catholic institutions to pay for abortion.
Well, folks, there you have the opinion of C.J. Doyle and the insights, perspicacious insights, if you ask me. And C.J., how can folks get in contact with your organization, should they want to?
Well, they can go to our website, www.catholicactionleague.org. They can contact us at catholicactionleague@gmail.com. That's catholicactionleague@gmail.com. Or call us at 781-251-9739. That's 781-251-9739. But they should also call their congressman and their senator and ask them to support the Senator Marco Rubio's The Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which will guarantee rights of conscience, and to contact their senator and congressman and indicate that they have to come out in opposition to this mandate. So far, only Congressman Lynch has been the only one in the Massachusetts delegation to do so. And I'm not sure how he stands about this latest so-called compromise. So it's important they let their congressmen and their senators know what an outrageous assault this is on the First Amendment and on Catholic religious freedom rights.
Thank you. Thanks once again, CJ, for all that you have. We hope you found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. And we hope you'll watch our show again next week as we have another interesting guest. Good day.